You will give it to me tonight, Eliza, or I will tell every house in this county what you are. You have been telling them for 4 years, Mr. Voss. It has cost you a great deal of paper. Roland, Duke of Halloway, had come down the passage to escape his own ball, and stopped short of the supper alcove because he did not care to be seen escaping. That was the whole of his intention. Through the half-drawn curtain he could see a tall man in a bottle-green coat, and past his shoulder a woman in grey, one of the companions, one of the paid women who sit against the wall all evening and are handed nothing. Sentiment does not become you. Voss's voice dropped. Your father is dead. His office is sold. There is nobody in England to care what becomes of you but a schoolgirl at Bath, and her quarter falls due on the 11th. Take your hand off my wrist. When you have promised me. Roland did not remember crossing the passage. He remembered the curtain rings shrieking along the pole, and the smell of hot wax and lobster patties, and his own voice, which came out flat and low and quite calm, in the tone he used for horses that had begun to think about bolting. Get away from her. Voss let go. He stepped back, and his face did something that Roland enjoyed for perhaps a second and a half, until the quality of the silence behind him registered, and he turned. The card-room doors had been folded back for the supper dance. Between the alcove and the length of the great gallery there was nothing at all. No wall, no screen, no mercy. 100 and some guests stood with their plates in their hands and their heads turned, and the nearest of them was 6 feet away, and every single one of them had heard him. It would be 7 months before the Duke of Halloway understood that the quaintest sentence he had ever spoken had cost her everything and him rather more, and that the bill for it would be presented in a public room with the county looking on. Your Grace is unwell, said Voss, recovering beautifully. The heat. I was assisting Miss Trent, who was faint. I am not faint, said Miss Trent. She was perhaps 25. Grey stuff gown, no jewels, a plain collar mended at the corner. She had a wrist that was going to be marked in the morning, and she did not hold it, or hide it, or look at it. She looked at the gallery full of staring faces the way a woman looks at whether she means to walk through. Your Grace, she said, you have been very good and you have ruined me. I would take it kindly if you did not say anything further. She curtsied and walked the whole length of that gallery alone, through 100 people, with her chin up and her step even, and Roland stood in the mouth of the alcove and let her do it. Because he had already learned in 15 seconds what a lifetime of instruction had not taught him, that his voice, used in a woman's defense, fell on her like a roof. By 1 o'clock the story had gone round twice and improved each time. At 1:30 Mrs. Danby, who employed Miss Trent and who had a mouth like a purse string, was heard in the yellow drawing-room to say that she had suspected an understanding for months, that no respectable woman keeps a young person of that sort about her, and that she would not sleep another night under a roof with her. Ma'am. Roland came into the room and the ladies rose in a rustle. Nothing occurred. The man had hold of her wrist. I told him to let go. Your Grace has never in his life told anybody to do anything about a companion's wrist, said Mrs. Danby, and everybody in this house knows it, and I am sorry for it, but I have my daughters to think of. He found Eliza Trent in the back passage at 2 in the morning with a bandbox and a cloak, waiting for the carrier's cart at a house where nobody would order out a carriage for her. She has turned you off tonight. She has. Then she pays your quarter. She does not pay it, because she has dismissed me for cause, and the cause is standing in front of me in a very good coat. Eliza set down the bandbox. Your Grace, may I say the whole of it plainly? You will not like it. Say it. A companion lives on a character. It is a piece of paper from her last mistress saying she is honest and sober and gives no trouble. Without one I cannot be taken as a governess, a companion, a housekeeper, or a shopwoman in a town where I am known. Mrs. Danby will not give me a character, and if she did she would not dare, because 100 people saw a duke pull back a curtain and speak for me in the voice a man uses for his own property. Then let me. If you give me money, the county is right. If you give me a place, the county is right. If you call on me, if you write to me, if you send your secretary with a banknote in a plain cover, the county is right, and my sister comes home from her school in Bath to a woman nobody will receive. Her voice was steady, and it was that steadiness more than anything else that night, that Roland could not get out of his head afterwards. There are £11 owing to me, and I have 4 in my pocket. Nan's quarter is 9 guineas, and it falls due on the 11th, and if it is not paid she is sent home, and there is nowhere to send her. Miss Trent, I cannot simply, I know. That is why I am telling you. She picked the bandbox up again. There is no help you can give me that will not be the proof of the thing I am accused of. That is the shape of my life now, and you made it in 4 words, meaning well, in a room you thought was empty. The carrier's cart came at 2:30. Roland stood in the cold yard and watched it go out under the arch with a lantern swinging on the shaft, and he could not think of one lawful, decent, effective thing to do, not one, and he was a duke, and it was his own house, and the thought would keep him awake for a fortnight. It was Hoyle who found the way through, which Roland resented, because he had spent 4 days failing to. Your Grace cannot give Miss Trent anything, said his secretary, but the estate may buy something from her at a price on terms in writing. That is not charity. That is trade, and nobody in England has ever been ruined by trade. By what? Her hand. The Wilham court rolls want engrossing, and the leases want fair copies, and I have been begging for a clerk since Michaelmas. Piecework, 3d the folio. She comes to the estate office in the town, not to this house. Your Grace does not go to the estate office. I own the estate office. Your Grace has not been inside it in 4 years, said Hoyle, and I would take it as a favour if the record continued. She dictated her own terms, which arrived on a half-sheet, payment weekly and in cash, no work taken at the great house, no advance, no gift, no coals, no basket, and the agreement to end at a fortnight's notice on either side without a reason given. Roland read it twice and signed it, and felt, absurdly, that he had been permitted something. So the winter arranged itself. Eliza Trent lodged over a saddler's in Wileham at 3 shillings a week, and walked to the estate office at 8, and wrote until the light went. Nan's 9 guineas went off to Bath on the 10th. Roland knew all of this because Hoyle told him, and Hoyle told him because Roland asked. Every day, in a voice he flattered himself was casual. What the county said, it said loudly. A companion turned off for a duke. Set up in the town, if you please, with a pen in her hand for the look of it. The first crack in that came on a Tuesday in the linen draper's, and Roland had it from 3 separate people by nightfall, each version better than the last. Mrs. Danby had been at the counter with her daughters when Eliza came in for thread. Mrs. Danby had drawn her skirts aside, and said, at a carrying volume, that she wondered some people dared show their faces where honest women bought their ribbons. And Eliza Trent had said, since you have raised it publicly, ma'am, I will answer publicly, and taken from her basket a small green memorandum book. Your own hand, ma'am. £22 the year, paid quarterly, 2nd quarter due at Christmas and unpaid. £11 owing. You dismissed me on the 11th of December for cause, and the cause you gave my face was that I was faint at supper, and the cause you have given the county is another thing entirely, and the two will not stand up in the same room together. She had set the book on the counter and opened it. I will take the £11, ma'am, and I will not take the character, because I would not have my honesty vouched for by a lady who has not decided from 1 week to the next what my crime is. The shop had been full. Mrs. Danby had paid on the Thursday by a servant in a sealed packet with no note. Roland laughed until he had to sit down, and then sat for some time not laughing at all. He broke his own rule in the 2nd week of January, when the sleet came sideways and the estate office chimney smoked, and he told himself he was inspecting a roof. She was at the long deal table in her cloak with the hood down, writing, her fingers red and split at the knuckles with chilblains, an inkstand set on a folded cloth to keep it off the cold stone. She did not stand. Your Grace is in the estate office. I am inspecting the roof. The roof is sound. The chimney draws badly because there is a jackdaw's nest in it, and Hoyle will not have it out before March because of the birds. She laid down her pen. You should not be here. I know it. He looked at the sheet under hand and stopped. That is engrossing hand. It is. Companions do not write engrossing hand. Companions write a pretty italic and cannot spell. This one writes what she was taught. By whom? Eliza turned the sheet face down, unhurried. Your Grace, The lease of Cold Ash Farm has a covenant in it for 6 loads of stone that has not been performed since 1806, and the tenant does not know he may demand it. I have made a note. That is what you are paying 3p a folio for. It is better value than my history." He went to the door and stopped there with his hand on the latch, because something had begun to trouble him low down the way a name troubles you at 3 in the morning. "Trent," he said. "There was a Trent who acted in my father's affairs, an attorney in Wylam." It would be 8-9 years ago. The pen did not move. The sleet went along the window in handfuls. "There was," said Eliza Trent. "What became of him?" "He was ruined," she said. "And then he died, and then his office was sold." "Your Grace will want the Cold Ash lease by Friday, and the light goes at 4. Rowland walked back through the sleet to where his horse was tied, and he could not have told anybody why his chest felt as though a hand had been laid flat against it. He knew nothing. He remembered nothing. There was only the shape of something at the edge of his own history, a name in his father's papers, a man ruined, and the cold, careful voice of a woman who wrote a law writer's hand and turned her page over when a duke looked at it. Rowland set about correcting the story, which he had never in his life done for anybody, and discovered that a duke cannot correct a story. He can only make it longer. He said it at the hunt dinner. He said it at the vestry. He said it to his own aunt in a letter of 4 pages. Nothing occurred. A man had hold of a woman's wrist. I told him to let go. The lady had never spoke to me before that evening and has not since, except upon the price of a folio. Each time the company agreed with him warmly, and each time he watched them file it away as the handsomest thing they had ever heard a man say about his mistress. But other things changed, and those were real. He stopped sending Hoyle to the estate office and started going himself on the days she was not there, so that the roof and the chimney and the flooded lane at Cold Ash got done, and she would find them done and know they had cost her nothing. He had the 6 loads of stone delivered to the tenant with an apology for 18 years of neglect. He left the jackdaws alone until March because she had said so, and sat in a smoking office 3 times rather than break his word to a woman who had not asked him for one. Nan Trent came from Bath for the holidays, 13, all elbows, entirely fearless. Rowland met the 2 of them on the Wyham road in a thaw, walking with a joint of mutton in a basket between them, and did not offer the carriage and touched his hat, and rode on, and was proud of himself for 2 whole miles. "You are learning to be careful," Eliza said when he next had occasion to speak to her. "It is not the same thing as being sorry, but it is quieter, and I am grateful for the quiet." "Tell me what would be the same thing." "Nothing you can buy," she said. "That is what makes it difficult for you." On the 4th of February the constable came to the saddler's shop with a warrant. Rowland heard it from Hoyle at 11 o'clock and was in the town by 12, and the market square was full of it. An information sworn before the magistrates by Mr. Julian Voss, gentleman, that Eliza Trent, spinster, had feloniously stolen and carried away a sealed paper, being a bill of exchange with its endorsements, the property of the said Voss, out of the office of the late attorney Trent in Wylam, on or about the 9th of March 4 years since. Felony, not a scold's quarrel, not a slander. Felony in a county where felony still meant a hanging in a bad year and transportation in a good one. She was taken before the bench and admitted to bail, and the 2 men who stood surety for her were the saddler she lodged with and a farmer from Cold Ash who had 6 loads of stone in his yard. Rowland was in the room. He was not permitted to be anything else, and he had never in his life been so exactly aware of the uselessness of his own person. He got 10 minutes with her in the passage behind the Sessions House, with Hoyle standing at the corner. "You will have the best man at the assizes," he said. "He is down from London and he owes me nothing, and there is no possible construction. No, Eliza? If the Duke of Halloway pays for my defence, then I am the kept woman with a lawyer, and every juror in that box knows it before I open my mouth, and Voss walks out of the room with his character and mine in his pocket." She was pale, but she was not shaking. "I have £4 and the piecework and a clean set of facts. That will have to do. That is pride. It is the only property I have left, and I have noticed that gentlemen call it pride when a woman keeps a thing they would call honour in themselves." She looked past him at the wet square. "Besides, you are trying to defend me. I do not want to be defended. I want to be heard. And those are different rooms. Voss came to the estate office 3 days later, in the middle of the afternoon, in his bottle green coat. Roland had it afterwards from Hoyle, who had been at the inner door with a ledger and had not moved. He offered to withdraw, Hoyle said. He was very frank about it, Your Grace. The prosecution to be dropped, the recognizances discharged, her name out of the calendar, and nothing more said in this county. Upon her delivering to him, entire and uncopied, the paper she took, and swearing before a magistrate that she had taken it in error, and knows nothing of its contents. And she said, Mr. Voss, you have wanted that paper for 4 years, and you have wanted it more than you have wanted my ruin, or you would have sworn this information in the first month. And then she said, you may have it on the 3rd of March, in open court from my own hand. With the bench looking on, not before and not anywhere else, Hoyle cleared his throat. He went white, Your Grace. I have never seen a man go so white so fast. Roland stood at the window of his own library with the winter coming on across the park, and understood 2 things. The first was that Eliza Trent had been carrying something in her sleeve since before he had ever heard her name, and that she had never once, in all the weeks of chilblains and threepenny folios, so much as hinted at it. The second was the date, the quarter sessions at Wylam, the 3rd of March. 3 weeks and 4 days, and at the end of them a woman he had ruined in 4 words would stand up in a room full of the same people, alone, with nothing in her hand but a piece of paper and whatever she had left of her nerve. There was a night in the middle of February that Roland afterwards kept the way other men keep a lock of hair. Snow had shut the Wyleham road, and he had walked down from the great house because the horses could not, and he brought the Caldashleys back himself with a candle lantern, and found her still at the deal table with a shawl over her cloak, and Nan asleep on the settle under 2 coats. They talked for an hour and a half about nothing that signified, the jackdaws, the price of quills, whether a man who wrote a bad hand could be trusted, which she maintained he could not. Then she said, my father was struck off the roll for a false entry in his day book. He did not make it. He was 61, and he had practiced in this town for 34 years, and the committee sat for 1 afternoon, and by the evening he was a person you crossed the market square to avoid. He died 14 months after, and I sold his desk to pay for the funeral. Roland put his hand flat on the table, near hers, and did not take it. Say the name, he said. Neither. If I say it to you, you will do something, she said, because you are a man who does things, and it is the kindest fault I know, and it will cost me everything I have left. Let me carry it 3 weeks more. On the 3rd of March I will say it out loud in a room where saying it means something, and I will say it in front of my father's neighbours, and then you may do as you please. I have never once in my life waited for anything. Then this will be good for you, said Eliza, and smiled at him, probably the first time, and the smoky little office with the sleeping schoolgirl in it was, for about 4 seconds, the best room Roland had ever stood in. He rode to Voss's lodgings in Ardenchester 8 days later. He told himself the whole way that he was reconnoitring. He was not. He knew what he was doing by the time he was in the room, and he did it, and he was calm, and he was even a little proud of the sum, because it was ruinously large, and he had never before given anybody anything that hurt. £3,000. The information withdrawn before the grand jury. No bill, no trial, no calendar, no felony, no rope, no ship. Voss took it in bank paper and counted it twice and said that the Duke of Halloway was a sentimentalist, and Roland let him say it, because he had won. She found out from the Sessions House door. The calendar of prisoners was posted there on the last Friday in February, and she had walked down through the slush to read her own name on it, as she had told Hoyle she meant to, so as to know exactly what she was to face. Her name had a line through it. No bill. Prosecution withdrawn by the prosecutor. She came up the avenue on foot in the wet, and Roland went down the steps to meet her smiling and got about 4 feet. Tell me you did not. I did. He was still smiling. It is over, Eliza. There is no charge. There is no trial. You are. There is no trial, she said. And then she said nothing for so long that the smile went off his face on its own. I asked you for one thing, said Eliza at last. Not money, not a lawyer, not a coat, not a carriage, not a word to the bench. One thing, to be heard. The 3rd of March was the only room in England where a woman with £4 could stand up and be listened to by 12 men on their oath and make a gentleman answer questions he has spent 4 years not answering. It was the only door I had. You have paid £3,000 to lock it. And you have paid the money to him, which he will use, and you have paid it in a way that tells this county exactly what they have always believed, that the Duke of Halloway bought a woman out of a felony because he could not afford to have her tried. You would have been transported. Do you understand what I have? I understand that you did not ask me. Her voice cracked once and she took it back. Not one letter, not one line. You did the great generous thing at a gallop, and you never stopped to find out whether I wanted to be saved or believed, and those are different rooms, and I told you so in the passage behind the Sessions House, and you did not hear a word of it. Then let me undo it. Tell me the name and I will have him. You will have him what? You have just made yourself the man who paid him. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, angry at herself for it. My father's name is still on that roll with a false entry beside it, and now it can never come off, because the only paper that could take it off was going to be handed up to a bench on the 3rd of March, and there is no bench now. She would not come in. She would not take the carriage. She walked back down the avenue in the wet with her hood up, and Roland stood on his own steps in the cold for a long time, holding a receipt for £3,000 that he could not have used to buy 1 minute of that conversation over again. On the 2nd of March, Hoyle came into the library without knocking, which he had never done in 9 years, and stood there with his hat still on. Your Grace had better come to the town. The new calendar was pasted up on the Sessions House door in the rain, and a crowd of 40 stood in front of it, and Roland read it over their heads. The quarter sessions at Wileham, the 3rd day of March. And in the clerk's round hand, sworn on her own oath before 2 magistrates that morning, at her own charge, without counsel, without surety, and without one word to him, Trent against Voss, forgery and uttering a forged instrument, knowing the same to be forged. The Sessions House at Wileham held perhaps 200, and there were 400 there by 9 o'clock. Standing in the aisles and along the back wall in wet wool that steamed in the lamplight. Roland stood at the back among the farmers. He had come at 8 and taken no seat. And when the clerk of the peace offered to make room on the bench beside the chairman, he refused it in a voice that came out harder than he meant, because he had understood at last that there was one thing he could give her, and it was the sight of him standing where he could do nothing. She came in at 10 in the grey stuff gown, alone, with a leather roll under her arm and no counsel, and asked the chairman's leave to conduct her own prosecution, being poor, and having no money for a gentleman of the bar. You are aware, Miss Trent, said the chairman, that the defendant has 3 counsel, and that the charge is a capital felony, and that you will be required to examine him yourself. I am aware of all 3, sir, said Eliza Trent, and the 3rd is the only one I have looked forward to. She began quietly, and she never once raised her voice, and Roland, who had heard great men speak in the Lords for 2 hours together and say nothing, listened to a woman in a mended collar do it in 40 minutes. She proved her father's daybook first. The law stationer who had ruled and sold it swore to the paper, and the leaf carrying the false entry had been cut, a new one pasted, and the paste line was visible when the leaf was held to the window, and she held it to the window and let the jury come down by one and look. She proved what had been asked of her father from his own letter book, in his own hand, dated the 16th of June 1809. I am required to attest an acceptance, which I did not see given and do not believe was given. I have declined. Mr. V. was displeased. Then she untied the leather roll. This is the instrument I am charged with stealing, she said. I did take it. I took it out of my father's strong box on the day his office was sold, because if I had left it there, it would have been in Mr. Voss's hands by that evening, and my father's name would have stayed exactly where he was put. I have carried it 4 years. I have never shown it to any living soul, because the only place where showing it could do any good was a court, and it has taken me 4 years to be accused of enough to get into one. Voss's leading counsel was on his feet. The chairman put him down. Read it, Miss Trent. She read it out in the flat voice of a woman reading a bill of fare. A bill of exchange drawn at Ardenchester on the 14th of June 1809 for £40,000, payable at 90 days, and accepted. The acceptance written across the face of it in a firm sloping hand, accepted by His Grace, the Duke of Halloway. The room came apart. It took the chairman a full minute and his stick on the desk to get it back. Roland did not hear the noise. He was aware of the man beside him gripping his arm and saying something, and of his own hat somewhere near his feet, and of the lamps swinging very slightly in the draught from the door. His father's name, £40,000, 9 years ago. The acceptance is a forgery, said Eliza into the quiet, and I can prove it out of the public record, and I have paid for the proof myself at 3p a folio, and here it is. She laid down a certified copy, sealed and stamped, of a power of attorney enrolled in Chancery. On the 9th of March 1809, the late Duke of Halloway was struck with a palsy of the right side at his house in this county. He never wrote his own name again. Every instrument executed for him from that day until his death was executed by his attorney under this power, is enrolled, and which any person may search for 2 shillings, and which recites the reason in terms. On the 14th of June 1809, the Duke of Halloway could not hold a pen. The hand on the face of that bill is a good hand. It is a strong, sloping, confident hand. It is not a dying man's. She turned, for the first time that morning, and looked down the length of the packed room to the back wall, where Roland stood among the farmers with his hat on the floor. If my father had attested that acceptance, she said, the bill would have been discounted in London within the week, and when it came back dishonoured at 90 days, the estate must have been sold to answer it, and the mineral leases at Cold Ash were already bespoke. The agreement is in the roll. And I have that too. My father was 61 years old. He was offered £800 to write his name under another man's, and he would not, and it took 9 months to finish him. Nobody spoke. Somewhere at the front, Mrs. Danby was crying into a black-edged handkerchief, and did not seem to know she was doing it. I did not know whose house it was when I took it, Eliza said. I knew it was a forgery, and I knew a forgery is only worth what it can be made to do, and I knew that whoever it was made against would never be told, 'cause men are not told these things until it is too late to thank anybody. I have known whose house it was for 4 years. Her chin came up. I never spoke of it, 'cause a woman in my position who tells a duke she has saved his fortune is asking him for something, and I had made up my mind that I would go into the ward or on the parish before I asked that man for anything. She turned back to the bench. Sir, she said, I call the defendant, and Roland at the back, with 400 people between him and her and £3,000 of useless bank paper on his conscience, found that he was weeping, quite silently, in a public room for the first time since he was 9 years old. She asked Voss 3 questions. Whether he had ever seen the late Duke of Halloway write his name after the 9th of March 1809, whether he had been in the room when the acceptance was written, whether he could tell the court the name of the man who had ruled the leaf that was pasted into an attorney's day-book, since it was not the stationer who had sold the book. He answered the first badly, the second worse, and to the third he said, I decline, and sat down without being told to, and after that the thing had a sort of dreadful momentum that even 3 counsel could not slow. The jury were out 11 minutes. Voss was convicted upon both counts, and the chairman, who did not care for capital sentences and had a merciful reputation to keep, passed a sentence of transportation for life, and Voss went out of the Sessions House by the low door, and out of the county and out of the story, and nobody in Wylam ever spoke his name again except as a date. Roland did the rest in public, because there was no other honest place to do it. He went himself to the committee at Ardenchester that had sat one afternoon in 1810 and finished a man in 3 hours, and he stood in front of them for 2 of their hours with the certified copies in his hand, and would not sit, and would not take wine, and would not be flattered. The roll was amended in April. The clerk read the amendment aloud in the market square on quarter day, as the practice was, that the entry against the name of the late attorney of Wylam was found false and was struck out, and his name restored, with the regret of the society. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd with her hands folded and her sister's arm through hers, and Roland watched her from across the square and did not go to her, because it was hers. The assembly was on the 22nd of April, at Halloway, in the long gallery, with the card-room doors folded back exactly as they had been in December, and every one of the 100 and some who had turned their heads that night was invited by name, and every one of them came. He stood in the mouth of the supper alcove. On the 11th of December, said Roland, I stood here and said 4 words to a man who had hold of a woman's wrist, and I said them quietly, and you all heard them anyway, and by morning she had lost her place, her wages, her character and her name, and I had lost nothing at all. I have thought a good deal since about why I said them quietly. He looked round the room. It was not delicacy, it was shame. I did not wish to be seen caring in front of you. That is the whole of it, and it is not a handsome thing to hear a man say about himself in his own house. Nobody moved. So I will say them again, at a proper volume, and nobody need turn round. He raised his voice until it rang off the ceiling. Get away from her, all of you. You have had 4 months of her, and she has never once been what you said she was. He told them the rest plainly. The £3,000 paid to a felon out of vanity dressed as rescue. The door he had locked. The 3 pences that had bought a certified copy in Chancery when his own money had bought nothing but a receipt. He told them what was on the bill of exchange, and what would have become of Halloway, and every acre and cottage and living in 3 parishes, if a 61-year-old attorney had signed a paper for £800. Then Mrs. Danby stood up, in front of 200 people, with her purse-string mouth trembling, and read out in a shaking voice the character she had refused in December, honest, sober, gives no trouble, and a great deal more besides, and asked Miss Trent's pardon, and got it more graciously than she deserved and much more quickly than she expected. Roland asked Eliza in the estate office, 4 days later among the leases, with the jackdaws loud in the chimney. I did not ask you once, he said, in the whole of it, so I am asking now, and I will keep asking, and if the answer is no, I will hear it as an answer and not as a difficulty. Will you marry me? Eliza Trent looked at him for a long moment with a pen still in her hand. You will want to know what I have decided about the 40,000, she said. I have never wanted anything less in my life. I will not have it. It was never money. It was a lie, and lies do not pay interest. She set the pen down. But you may buy my father's office in the Market Square, and you may put a good roof on it, and you may endow it as a free school where the girls of this town are taught to write a hand that stands up in a court. And you may put his name over the door in stone so that it cannot be taken down by a committee in an afternoon. Done? And yes, said Eliza. Ask me every day, though. I find I have got a taste for being asked. They were married in June quietly in the church at Wileham, with the saddler and the farmer from Coldash in the second pew. Nan Trent came to live at Halloway and slid down the great banister on the second morning and was caught doing it by Hoyle, who pretended to have seen nothing and then did it himself at Christmas on a wager. The free school opened in October with 19 girls and a stone lintel with a good name cut deep into it, and on summer evenings, when Roland came into the library and found his wife asleep over the Wileham Court rolls with ink on her fingers and her father's letter book on the shelf above among 4 centuries of Halloway papers, Nan would put her head round the door, take one look and say, "Get away from her," in a voice of terrible ducal calm. Every time without fail it made the Duke of Halloway laugh until he had to hold the table.